"Ethan, we're done?" The words hit Ethan like a physical blow, delivered through the phone line with a chilling mix of impatience and disdain that he recognized all too well as Elara's. "Elara, are you upset with me?" Ethan's voice was laced with a desperate plea. "If I've done something wrong, just tell me. Please, just don't keep threatening to break up." He held his breath, every nerve ending on high alert, waiting for a response that felt like a life sentence. Instead, he was met with a curt, venomous dismissal. "Go to hell, you pathetic loser. We're over." Then, the line went dead, punctuated by the sharp click of her phone disconnecting. Ethan managed a weak, humorless smile. He told himself this was just another one of Elara's tantrums. Elara had a fiery temper, a trait he'd indulged and placated since they started dating in university. He treated her like a princess, anticipating her every whim. He remembered the designer handbag she'd fixated on, a ludicrously priced item at $6,600. At the time, his entire savings amounted to a meager $5,300. He hadn't been able to buy it for her immediately. Elara's reaction had been explosive. She'd accused him of not loving her, declaring that if he truly did, he'd buy her the bag, or else they were through. Ethan had buckled down, juggling his studies with a grueling part-time job and food delivery gigs, sacrificing sleep and meals to scrape together the remaining sum. It took a month of relentless work, but he finally managed to buy her the coveted bag. Only then did her storm of anger subside. He'd foolishly believed this was just another one of those episodes, a minor outburst he could smooth over. He redialed her number, hoping to reason with her, but was met with the cold, automated voice. "I'm sorry. The number you have dialed?" She blocked him. Panic began to set in, a cold dread creeping through his veins. That evening, instead of his usual delivery rounds, Ethan went to a florist. He carefully selected a bouquet of vibrant red roses, Elara's favorite, and headed to the gleaming office tower where she'd recently landed her dream job. They had met in college. Ethan was a couple of years her senior. She had confided in him about her precarious financial situation, the fear that she might have to drop out due to lack of funds. Ethan, fueled by youthful idealism and a burgeoning affection for her, had stepped up, promising to cover her tuition and living expenses. That promise had stretched into 3 years, culminating in Elara's graduation and her triumphant entry into a prestigious corporation, the very company where she now worked. The evening air was crisp, carrying the first bite of autumn, but the sight of the roses in his hand warmed Ethan from the inside out. Elara loves roses, he thought. When she sees these, she'll understand. She'll be happy. As he scanned the entrance, his gaze snagged on a familiar figure. Elara. The hopeful smile that had begun to form on his lips faltered, then vanished completely as he took in the scene unfolding before him. Elara's hand was intertwined with another man's, a man in a sharp, tailored suit. They strolled side by side, their bodies close, an undeniable intimacy radiating from them. They were laughing, heads bent together, sharing some private joke. Then, the man leaned in and whispered something in her ear, and Elara threw her head back, her laughter ringing out, bright and carefree. Ethan's heart plummeted, as if a lead weight had dropped into his chest. It felt like it was shattering, piece by agonizing piece. Then, Elara's eyes landed on him. Her smile instantly evaporated, mirroring his own earlier expression. Her gaze hardened, locking onto his with an icy indifference. For a fleeting moment, Ethan clung to a sliver of hope, expecting her to recoil, to disentangle her hand from the stranger's. Instead, she did the opposite. She leaned in and kissed the man, a deliberate, lingering kiss right on the corner of his mouth. Then, arm in arm with her new companion, she sauntered towards Ethan. If a flicker of doubt had remained in Ethan's mind, Elara's next words extinguished it completely, dousing the last embers of affection he held for her. "Ethan, I told you, we're over. Why are you still pathetic enough to show up at my office building?" Her eyes flicked dismissively at the roses in his hand, before she sneered and knocked them to the ground with a careless flick of her wrist. Petals scattered across the pavement, a vibrant splash of red against the gray concrete. Ugh, did you actually think these cheap flowers could win me back? Get real. Being your girlfriend back then was just a means to an end, someone to foot my bills and tuition. Now, I'm a white-collar professional. I work for a Fortune 500 company. Do you honestly think you're still in my league? Before Ethan could gather his wits, she spat out a vulgarity, laced with contempt. A toad lusting after a swan. Then, with a flourish, she draped her arm around the man beside her, turning to Ethan with a triumphant smirk. Look closely, you pathetic simp. This is my boyfriend. He's Julian, the heir to the Chow Corporation. Can you even compare? You're not even worthy to polish his shoes. Have some self-respect and just disappear from my life. A nobody office worker like you? You're beneath me. You're just a lapdog, Ethan. Julian, the man in the suit, chuckled, tightening his hold on Elara's shoulder, his eyes raking over Ethan with undisguised mockery. No money, no honey. Buddy, if you're unemployed, maybe I can throw you a bone. Security guard position at my company, maybe $2,000 a month, if you're lucky. Ha 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 ha. Elara, clinging to Julian's arm, turned and walked away, her laughter echoing in the cool night air. Ethan watched them go, a hollow ache in his chest, but a strange calm settling over him. He allowed himself a bitter chuckle. He was laughing at his own naivety, laughing at years of devotion wasted, laughing at his own blindness. He'd been so wrong about Elara. Julian and Elara paused a short distance away, glancing back at him. He overheard Elara's saccharine voice, laced with malice. Ignore him, Julian. He's just a clingy ex, a total simp. Probably going to have a mental breakdown now that he's lost me. Let's just go, honey. Some people are just toxic. Ethan watched their retreating figures, a cold clarity washing over him, replacing the hurt with a detached amusement. Elara had no idea. She had absolutely no clue. He was the actual heir to the Chow Corporation. The man she was fawning over was just a stand-in, a convenient placeholder. Once they were completely out of sight, Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he was looking for. He pressed call. Dad, it's Ethan. I've thought it over. I'm ready to join Chow Corporation. He paused, then added, a hint of steel entering his voice. But I want to earn my way up. I want to start from the ground floor, like everyone else. He hung up, a sense of resolve hardening his features. He bent down, gathering the scattered, crushed roses from the pavement. He walked to the nearest trash can and tossed them in, the vibrant blooms disappearing into the darkness. It felt like discarding not just flowers, but years of misplaced affection, years of loyalty given to someone who had never truly valued it. Consider it tuition, he thought grimly, for a harsh lesson learned. After graduation, Ethan had received a lucrative job offer from a prestigious tech firm in another city. But he'd turned it down, choosing to stay, tethered to Elara, wanting to be there for her, to build a life with her in this city. He was an orphan, alone in the world. Elara had felt like family, the first real connection he'd made, someone who seemed to genuinely care. He'd cherished that, convinced he'd finally found a home, a belonging. But slowly, subtly, Elara had changed. The designer bag ultimatum, the relentless pressure for expensive vacations, forcing him to work himself to the bone, juggling multiple jobs, even taking on late-night gaming gigs just to keep up with her demands. He'd been stretched thin, exhausted, with no time for himself, but she'd still complain about his emotional unavailability, his lack of emotional support. Not long ago, his biological parents had finally tracked him down. He'd learned the truth. He was the long-lost son of the Chow family, the sole heir to the vast Chow Corporation empire. His parents had been overjoyed, eager to welcome him into the family and into the business. They wanted him to join Chow Corporation immediately, but Ethan had hesitated, initially declining their offer. The company had a strict policy against workplace romances, especially between employees of different ranks. He hadn't wanted his family connections to create complications, to give him an unfair advantage, or to jeopardize his relationship with Elara. He'd wanted to prove himself on his own merits, both at work and in love. He had planned to tell Elara everything, to share his secret, to introduce her to his real world. But she had preempted him, ending things so abruptly, so cruelly. Now, with nothing holding him back, joining Chow Corporation was no longer a question, but a decision. The transition was swift. Ethan resigned from his current job, tidying up loose ends, and reported for duty at Chow Corporation. Initially, no one at the company knew his true identity. He was just another new hire, another face in the crowd. He followed the department manager to his assigned workstation, ready to settle in, when a saccharine, grating voice cut through the air. "What are you doing here?" Ethan straightened up, turning to face the source of the unwelcome sound. Elara. Her eyes were narrowed, radiating undisguised hostility. Before he could react, she strode over and slapped him, the force of the blow snapping his head to the side. Smack! The sharp sound echoed through the open-plan office, instantly drawing the attention of every employee. All eyes were on them. Elara, seemingly oblivious to the sudden audience, or perhaps even relishing it, raised her voice, making sure everyone within earshot could hear her. "You're actually here? At my company? Are you completely shameless? Let me tell you something, Ethan. If you keep stalking me, I'm calling security." Her voice dripped with theatrical indignation, playing to the silent, judging crowd. Elara's eyes were red-rimmed, her lower lip trembling slightly, a picture of feigned victimhood. Ethan remembered a time when he'd been completely taken in by this act, mistaking it for genuine vulnerability. He'd been so wrong. Whispers rippled through the office. "Wow, this simp is bold. Showing up at her workplace? Simp's gonna simp, always end up with nothing." Seeing the tide of public opinion turning in her favor, Elara raised her hand again, aiming another slap at Ethan's other cheek. This time, Ethan was ready. He intercepted her wrist, his grip tightening like steel. "Let go of me, or I'll call security." "Security." Her voice rose in pitch, bordering on hysteria. The HR manager, alerted by the commotion, rushed over, pulling Elara away. "Elara, calm down. Ethan is a new employee here. He's your colleague now." Her voice was firm, authoritative. Elara froze, staring at Ethan, her carefully constructed facade momentarily crumbling. He works here? But this is a Fortune 500 company." Her voice trailed off, disbelief etched on her face. Ethan allowed himself a cold, humorless smile. She'd forgotten, hadn't she? Forgotten that he was also capable, also ambitious, also valuable. He hadn't applied to Chow Corporation before because his academic specialization hadn't aligned with their open positions at the time. He'd always been more than just a nobody office worker. He'd just dimmed his own light, trying to make her shine brighter. Now, he was simply reclaiming his own brilliance. HR insisted Elara apologize, but she, emboldened by the perceived backing of Julian, refused point blank. She glared at Ethan, a sneer twisting her lips. "You only came to work here to chase after me, didn't you? Figures. Someone like you, you'd never find a woman better than me. But let me give you some advice, loser. Don't even look at me in this office. You're an eyesore. You disgust me. I'm taken now, remember? And way out of your league." With a dramatic flourish, she turned on her heel, clutching her designer coffee cup, and strutted into Julian's office, slamming the door shut behind her. Despite the company's official policy against workplace relationships for new hires, the rules seemed to bend, or rather, shatter, around Julian. Elara became a fixture in Julian's office, disappearing behind those closed doors for hours at a time. It wasn't that Ethan was particularly interested, but Elara made sure her presence and her relationship with Julian was impossible to ignore. Every time she emerged from Julian's office, she'd make a point of passing by Ethan's workstation, often with a smug, triumphant look in her eyes. Her favorite taunt was a variation on a theme. "See, Ethan, I deserve better. You could work at Chow Corp for a lifetime, and you still wouldn't measure up to a fraction of what Julian is." She'd declare her revulsion for him, demand he stay away, and yet, she seemed pathologically drawn to his workspace, constantly dropping by to deliver these pointless, barbed pronouncements. Ethan, finally losing patience, had snapped back. If you have so much free time, maybe you should consider a mental health clinic. I hear the doctors there are excellent listeners. She'd stared at him, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before reverting to her usual haughty persona. Don't think for a second that changing your attitude will make me notice you again. Dream on. A simp is always a simp. Thought you'd grown a backbone, but nope. Still the same pathetic loser underneath, aren't you? She'd punctuated her words with a sharp click of her heels, stalking away, leaving Ethan to his work. As he gradually befriended his colleagues, Ethan pieced together the office gossip surrounding Elara and Julian. In the eyes of his co-workers, Julian, with his privileged background and superficial charm, was the ultimate catch, a high-quality male specimen. A swarm of women buzzed around him, each vying for his attention, each deluding themselves into believing they were the girlfriend. Julian, playing the field with practiced ease, neither confirmed nor denied any of these claims, basking in the adoration. Just then, as if on cue, Julian emerged from his office, his arm casually draped around the waist of another female employee, leading her back into his private domain, both laughing with forced gaiety. Every eye in the office flicked towards Elara, a silent, collective judgment hanging in the air. After all, Elara had been Julian's most visible girlfriend lately. Ethan, wanting no part of this messy office drama, stood up and headed to the restroom, seeking a brief escape. As he emerged from the restroom, he found Elara waiting for him, a tense, almost desperate look on her face. These past few days had visibly taken a toll. The vibrant, sharp-edged Elara he knew was fraying at the edges, replaced by a strained, almost haunted version. The moment she saw him, the dam of her carefully constructed composure seemed to break. She unleashed a torrent of words, her voice tight with a forced bravado that didn't quite mask the underlying insecurity. Ethan, you see, right? My boyfriend is loaded, filthy rich. Once I marry him, I'll be set for life. No more worries about money, ever. Unlike you, who worked for years and still hesitated to buy me a decent bag. I'm happy now. So happy. She repeated the phrase like a mantra, as if trying to convince herself more than him. Yes, Ethan thought, a bitter understanding dawning. This is Elara. He remembered a drunken confession she'd made years ago, during one of their early arguments, when she declared, with unwavering conviction, that she'd rather cry in a BMW than laugh on a shared bike. He dismissed it then as just angry words, fueled by alcohol and frustration. Now, he understood. It wasn't just a throwaway line. It was her core belief. He had been a placeholder, a good enough option until something better came along. And now, she'd found her BMW. But the promised happiness seemed elusive. But what did it matter to him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Ethan tried to sidestep her, wanting to return to the relative peace of his workstation. Elara blocked his path, her eyes wide, incredulous. Why aren't you saying anything? Isn't this what you wanted? To get my attention? All this? Ignoring me? Acting aloof? Wasn't it all just to make me notice you again? Ethan was beyond exasperated. What was she even talking about? He'd been drowning in work, barely noticing anything, let alone plotting some elaborate scheme to regain her attention. He spoke, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Elara, we broke up. Remember? Please, just leave me alone. Shouldn't you be with your loaded boyfriend right now? He just disappeared into his office with another woman, didn't he? The unspoken question hung in the air between them, a silent accusation. Perhaps he'd inadvertently hit a nerve. Elara's voice shot up several decibels, laced with a defensive fury. Ethan, just admit it. You're jealous. You're jealous that Julian has me. Okay, fine. Maybe Julian is a bit of a player, but he has power. He has money. He snaps his fingers, and $100,000 appears. That's real status. That's what a real man is. All I have to do is secure my place as his girlfriend, and then wife. Then, I'll be the undisputed Mrs. Chow. I'll have everything I've ever wanted. Ethan nodded, a weary, perfunctory gesture. Sounds great for you. Good luck with that. He watched disbelief flicker across her face. It was true. In the past, whenever they'd clashed, he'd always been the one to placate her, to apologize, even when he wasn't in the wrong. He'd indulged her every whim, spoiled her, nurtured her temper tantrums into a monstrous sense of entitlement. Julian, he suspected, wouldn't play that game. He probably showered her with attention when he was interested, and then simply ignored her when he wasn't. Elara, accustomed to constant validation and control, was likely spiraling in this unpredictable dynamic. Her sudden approach, her desperate need for his attention. It wasn't about him, not really. It was about regaining a sense of control, a sense of worth, by eliciting a familiar, predictable reaction from him. His unwavering devotion. She was seeking validation from the one person who had always given it freely. She craved the feeling of superiority, the comfort of knowing she could still command his attention, his apology, his unwavering simping. But Ethan had changed. The moment he decided to join Chow Corporation, he'd consciously, deliberately, locked away his love brain, burying it deep, replacing it with a laser focus on work. He was driven now, consumed by ambition, by a burning desire to prove himself, to excel. He was a different man. Elara bit her lip, her eyes darting around, checking to make sure no one was within earshot. Then, in a move that startled him, she reached out and grabbed his hand, her grip surprisingly tight. "Ethan," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a strange, pleading tone creeping in. What if I said I'd give you another chance? To win me back?" Ethan recoiled, snatching his hand away as if burned. "Elara," he said, his voice cold, firm, "you were the one who broke up with me. And now, you're the one who's regretting it? You don't love me. You never did. You just want to feel important again. To feel like you still have that power over me. Well, guess what? You don't. You unilaterally declared us broken up. Fine. Consider it done. I agree. We're over. And what you do, who you date, who you manipulate, it's none of my concern anymore." He didn't want to prolong this bizarre, unsettling encounter. Seizing the opportunity created by her stunned silence, he moved quickly, sidestepping her and walking briskly back to his workstation, leaving her standing alone in the hallway. Behind him, he heard the sharp, frustrated stamp of Elara's heel on the tiled floor. "Ethan, you'll regret this. You hear me? You will regret this." He almost smiled. He assumed it was just empty words, a petulant threat from a woman scorned, a spoiled princess enraged that her former lapdog had finally stopped licking her boots. He had no idea just how childish, how utterly clueless her idea of regret would turn out to be. Lost in his work, Ethan was immersed in the intricacies of a complex financial proposal. It was his first major assignment at Chow Corporation and arguably the most challenging. Raw material prices were skyrocketing, threatening to derail the company's production. Budget. He'd been working day and night, fueled by caffeine and sheer determination, poring over spreadsheets, analyzing market trends, searching for a viable solution. He was so focused, so consumed by the task at hand, that he barely registered Elara's increasingly frequent, pointed stares, the subtle undercurrent of something in her behavior towards him. Finally, after 3 sleepless nights, fueled by an endless supply of instant coffee, he cracked it. He'd found a solution, a brilliant, innovative strategy that would not only mitigate the immediate crisis, but also position the company for long-term financial stability. He couldn't wait to present his proposal. He practically sprinted to his manager's office, eager to share his breakthrough. He knocked briskly on the door. The door swung open, and standing there, blocking his path, a smug, feline smile playing on her lips, was Elara. Her clothes were disheveled, her hair slightly mussed. She opened the door wider, her eyes flicking over him with a dismissive, almost contemptuous glance. Ethan, his mind still buzzing with figures and projections, barely registered her presence. He simply walked past her, his gaze fixed, straight ahead, and presented his proposal directly to Julian, who was seated behind his expansive desk, looking surprisingly pleased. Even Leo, the guy at the next workstation, who was notoriously stingy with compliments, gave him an impressed thumbs up. "Ethan, man, you're a freaking genius. This proposal? It's been giving the big boss a migraine for weeks, and you cracked it in 3 nights? Seriously impressive. You're on the fast track to a promotion, for sure," Leo added, nudging him playfully. Ethan kept his expression neutral, deflecting the praise with a self-deprecating shrug. "Nah, just doing my job. Still the newbie here. Promotions are way off in the future." But inside, a quiet satisfaction bloomed. Yeah, he thought wryly. Not bad for the boss's son, working for his own company. Leo leaned in conspiratorially, lowering his voice. "Dude, you gotta understand, this company is all about meritocracy. No seniority BS. You deliver. You climb. That's why everyone here is so cutthroat. If you want that fat paycheck, you gotta hustle, or you'll be stuck in the mailroom forever." But then there's, well, Leo glanced around, lowering his voice even further, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "Look at Elara. Barely lifted a finger, no real output. But boom, fast track to, well, something. All because she's, friendly with Julian." He winked, elaborating unnecessarily. "Word around the water cooler is Julian's got a new flavor of the month every week. But Elara? She's playing the game smart. I've seen her going in and out of the manager's office a lot lately." Ethan recalled Elara's dismissive glare, the mussed hair, the disheveled clothes. He understood now. She'd managed to recapture Julian's fickle attention. Hence, the sudden shift in her attitude, the renewed sense of triumph. Right, he thought, a wave of weariness washing over him, still playing the same old game, and still seeing me as Plan B. But it was her delusion, her twisted reality. It had nothing to do with him. He had a proposal to finalize, a company to help run, and a career to build. He had bigger fish to fry. Much, much bigger fish. The proposal was greenlit almost immediately, rubber-stamped and ready to roll. Except, when the official document circulated, the name emblazoned as the author wasn't Ethan's. It was Elara's. Elara practically vibrated with smugness when Ethan crossed paths with her in the hallway. Her smile was so wide, so artificially sweet, it was almost painful to look at. Her opening salvo was dripping with saccharine mockery. "Ethan, did you see? Talent? Skill? Means nothing, darling. Connections are everything. My promotion? A word from Julian, that's all it took. Who would dare question it?" She tossed her hair, a picture of undeserved triumph. Ethan just chuckled a dry, humorless sound. "Absolutely. May you and Julian, the great Chow heir, be eternally intertwined." He emphasized the last word with heavy irony. Elara, predictably missing the sarcasm, preened. "Of course. Who else would I want to be intertwined with? You?" She shuddered theatrically, as if the very idea was repulsive. With a final, dismissive flick of her wrist, she sashayed towards the general manager's office, her high heels clicking a triumphant rhythm on the polished floor. Leo, from the neighboring workstation, watched her go, shaking his head in disgust. That Elara, stealing credit like it's an Olympic sport, just because she's dating the boss's son. Unbelievable, he muttered, clenching his fists in impotent rage. Ethan just shrugged, a picture of nonchalance. What's meant to be mine will find its way to me. What's not, well, no amount of striving will change that. Leo, misinterpreting his apparent calm as resignation, clapped him on the shoulder, his voice heavy with sympathy. "Chin up, buddy. Just gotta roll with the punches in this kind of place. You'll get used to it. These things happen all the time." Ethan just smiled, a silent, knowing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, as he watched the door of the general manager's office swing shut behind Elara. Oh, Leo, he thought, if you only knew. The real game had just begun, and he was holding all the cards. The day of the presentation arrived, and Elara was a peacock in full display. She radiated an almost blinding self-importance, basking in the unearned spotlight. She clutched the proposal document like a trophy, launching into a performance of fabricated expertise, reciting lines she clearly hadn't even bothered to understand. "This proposal," she declared, her voice ringing with false authority, "is the culmination of days, nights even, of relentless effort. See these?" She dramatically pointed to faint shadows under her eyes, carefully applied with makeup, no doubt. Dark circles, people. Dedication. Then, with a practiced pout, she draped herself onto Julian's arm, batting her eyelashes with exaggerated sweetness. "Julian, darling, you have to promote me to something less demanding, please? Something cushy, with high pay, low stress. You know, so I can actually have some time to spend with you. Quality time, you know?" Just as Julian's hand began to creep possessively towards Elara's waist, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket. Whatever news the call delivered, it wiped the playful smirk right off Julian's face. His expression shifted from casual arrogance to something bordering on panic. He mumbled a hasty excuse, abruptly disentangling himself from Elara's clinging embrace, and practically bolted towards the stairwell, disappearing downstairs as if the building were on fire. Moments later, Julian reappeared, escorting a figure that made the entire room collectively hold its breath. Ethan's father, Chairman Chow himself. Julian's face was now ashen, all bravado evaporated. He practically shrank into himself, transformed from a swaggering executive into a nervous underling. He ushered Chairman Chow to a seat at the head of the conference table, then, with a forced, strained smile, awkwardly gestured towards Elara, introducing her to his father. "Dad, this is Elara. She's the one I was telling you about. She created the proposal. The brilliant one." Julian's voice lacked its usual confidence, sounding thin and reedy. Elara, oblivious to the seismic shift in the room's atmosphere, beamed, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She'd clearly envisioned this moment as her grand entrance into the Chow family dynasty. She'd even gone to the trouble of applying flawless makeup, a vision of polished, ambitious femininity. In her mind, she was ticking all the boxes, capable, beautiful, and poised for success. Chairman Chow didn't even glance at her. His gaze swept across the room, sharp and assessing. He settled into his chair, his presence radiating an aura of quiet authority that silenced the room. He cut straight to the chase, his voice crisp and businesslike. "I've heard there's been a remarkable proposal submitted recently, one that addresses the company's current challenges effectively." His eyes scanned the faces around the table. "I'd like to hear the details. From the person who created it." Elara froze, her carefully rehearsed smile faltering. She blinked, her eyes darting around the room, a deer caught in headlights. In the face of Chairman Chow's directness, her practiced performance crumbled. Julian, his own face a mask of discomfort, gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible shove from behind, urging her forward. Elara, flustered, stammered, extending the proposal document towards Chairman Chow with a trembling hand. The proposal. It's all in here, Chairman." Her voice was barely a whisper, a stark contrast to her earlier confident pronouncements. She was clearly hoping he'd simply read it himself, sparing her the embarrassment of actually having to explain its contents. "No need," Ethan interjected, stepping forward smoothly. "Allow me." And then, he began. He articulated the entire proposal, detail by detail, flawlessly, effortlessly. He didn't just regurgitate the words on the page. He expanded on them, adding nuances, elaborating on the underlying logic, seamlessly incorporating points and details that weren't even explicitly written in the document. He spoke with clarity, confidence, and a deep understanding of the intricacies of the plan, painting a vivid picture of its potential impact and strategic advantages. As Ethan spoke, Elara and Julian's faces morphed through a spectrum of emotions, settling finally on a ghastly combination of green and purple. Disbelief warred with dawning horror. Elara, in a desperate, last-ditch attempt to salvage her rapidly sinking ship, rounded on Ethan, pointing a manicured finger at him. "Ethan, I can't believe you. You're a thief. You actually stole my proposal. Her voice was shrill, accusatory, laced with desperate indignation. Julian, seizing on her outburst as a lifeline, chimed in, echoing her accusations. Dad, don't listen to him. This guy's just a loser, a pathetic simp. He's obsessed with Elara, and he's trying to sabotage her success because she rejected him. Enough. Chairman Chow's voice cracked like thunder, cutting through Julian's blustering defense. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, fixed on his adopted son, radiating a cold, profound disappointment. Julian, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. I placed you in the general manager's position to give you an opportunity to learn, to grow, to prove yourself. Instead, you've abused your authority, indulged in petty office politics, and taken credit for work that isn't yours. His voice dripped with disdain. Julian's face crumpled, panic replacing his arrogance. He stammered, scrambling for an explanation, a denial, anything to mitigate the damage. Dad, please, you're misunderstanding. It's not like that. I can explain. Spare me the excuses, Julian. I'm well aware of your management style within this company. And as for this proposal, Chairman Chow paused, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips as he turned to Ethan. I was already familiar with it. In fact, I reviewed it some time ago. Julian and Elara exchanged a look of utter, gaping incomprehension. Ethan stepped forward, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. Yes, Chairman. Your insightful questions and feedback were invaluable. You provided the initial inspiration. Really, you were incredibly generous with your time and expertise. The truth hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Ethan had been working directly with Chairman Chow, consulting him, seeking his guidance all along. And Chairman Chow, of course, had recognized his own son's talent, his sharp intellect, his business acumen. Chairman Chow's stern expression softened, a hint of warmth entering his eyes as he turned to Ethan. You're my son, Ethan. Why the chairman formality? Why not, Dad? I wasn't sure if it was appropriate in a professional setting, in front of colleagues, Ethan demurred, a touch of self-conscious awkwardness in his voice. Nonsense. After 20 years of silence? I haven't heard you call me Dad in over 2 decades. Now that I've finally found you, you're going to call me Dad as often as possible. Is that clear? There was a playful, almost pleading note in his voice. Ethan smiled, a genuine, warm smile that lit up his face. Yes, Dad. Chairman Chow beamed, the stern facade melting away completely. In a swift, decisive move, he announced, effective immediately, Ethan Chow is promoted to General Manager of Chow Corporation. He turned to Julian, his voice hardening again. Julian will be reassigned to a support role. The euphemism hung heavy in the air, laden with unspoken implications. Julian's reign as General Manager was over. Ethan, now officially General Manager, was assigned his own spacious corner office. As he began to unpack, organizing his belongings, the muffled sounds of a heated argument drifted from Julian's former office nearby. It was Elara and Julian, their voices rising and falling in a crescendo of recriminations. Julian's new, downsized office, apparently, wasn't soundproofed. You're just an adopted son, and not even a good-looking one. And you're such a player. Elara's voice, sharp and accusatory, carried clearly through the thin walls. Ethan had passed by Julian's office earlier, on his way to the water cooler, and had caught a glimpse of a new, doe-eyed intern being ushered inside by Julian. Now, the office was a battleground, 3 figures locked in a silent, furious standoff. Elara, Julian, and the unfortunate intern, caught in the crossfire. 6 eyes, Ethan imagined, locking daggers. Elara's tone shifted, becoming even more venomous, more personal. Her carefully constructed facade of politeness had completely shattered. Look at you. You're a nobody, ugly, incompetent, and all you had going for you was the Chow name, and even that wasn't real. You just used the Chow name to sleep around. And I actually dumped Ethan, who was always so good to me, for you. I'm such an idiot. I regret it so much. You're a danan. She spat out the last word, a Chinese term for scumbag, with particular venom. Ethan chuckled softly to himself, a wry, knowing sound. Scumbag now? But just yesterday, he was the great Chow'er. In Elara's world, emotions were transactional, loyalty was a commodity, and gold was the only true north. Coffee in hand, Ethan settled into his new office, the sounds of the escalating office drama fading into background noise. He worked late into the night, the city lights twinkling below, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. That evening, he returned to his old apartment, the small, rented space that had been his refuge for years. As he opened the door, a surprising aroma wafted out to greet him, the unmistakable scent of home-cooked food. Elara, wearing one of his aprons, emerged from the tiny kitchen, carrying a steaming plate. Seeing him, her face lit up with an almost childlike eagerness. You're back. Come eat. Dinner's ready. Her voice was unnaturally bright, almost chirpy. I made your favorites. Spicy pickled fish, crawfish, and sweet and sour pork. She gestured towards a small table, meticulously set for two. Ethan blinked, momentarily speechless. For a few seconds, he was transported back to a different time, a different reality. He and Elara, in this cramped apartment, sharing a meal, a semblance of domesticity. Except, Elara had never cooked a single meal in their entire relationship. She must have sensed his hesitation, his confusion. I thought you wouldn't come back to this, hovel, she said, her voice laced with a forced, brittle cheerfulness. But you're still here, aren't you? His father had indeed offered him a sprawling mansion, a symbol of his newfound status. But Ethan had demurred, postponing the move. He'd been too consumed with work, with the proposal, with the whirlwind of his new reality to even think about relocating. He just stared at Elara, a strange mix of weariness and detached curiosity washing over him. He finally found his voice, cold and firm. Elara, the keys to this apartment. I seem to have forgotten to ask for them back. Please hand them over. Elara's bright facade crumbled. Her eyes welled up, the carefully constructed cheerfulness replaced by a familiar, wounded expression. Are you still angry with me? But I love you, Ethan. It's all Julian's fault. That manipulative jerk. Without him, we'd still be together, happy. Ethan's lips curled into a sardonic smile. Elara, even without Julian, there would have been a next Julian, a next rich guy, a next opportunity. You're not looking for a boyfriend, Elara. You're looking for an ATM, a status symbol, a stepping stone. His words hit their mark. Elara's face flushed crimson. She stood her ground, however, stubbornly refusing to leave. But I made dinner. Look, all this food. At least, try a bite? Before you make me leave? Her voice pleaded, a desperate, wheedling tone creeping in. I'm allergic to seafood, Elara. Severely. It was a fact she should have known, if she'd ever truly paid attention to him, if she'd ever actually cared. He was allergic to seafood. Elara, on the other hand, adored it. Countless times, he'd painstakingly peeled shrimp for her, deboned fish fillets, silently enduring the seafood aroma, the one food group that made his throat swell and his skin itch. He'd always placed the meticulously prepared seafood dishes in her bowl, never touching a bite himself. And in all those years, she'd never once noticed, never once asked why he never ate the dishes he so lovingly prepared for her. And the sweet and sour pork? She stammered, grasping at straws. Not hungry. He was done playing games. Tears streamed down Elara's face, blurring her carefully applied makeup. A tremor of genuine hurt entered her voice. You weren't like this before. Ethan watched her tears, unmoved. And you weren't like this before, he countered, his voice flat, echoing her own words back at her. This Elara, the one who weaponized tears, who manufactured drama, who threw tantrums and shattered dishes. He remembered countless evenings spent cleaning up her messes, both literal and figurative. He recalled one particularly vivid memory. Elara, enraged because he couldn't afford a spontaneous trip abroad, unleashing her fury on the tiny apartment, flipping over furniture, smashing dishes, leaving a chaotic trail of destruction in her wake. He'd spend hours cleaning up the debris, both physically and emotionally. And her parting shot that night, amidst the shattered remnants of their evening? I don't want it. Get out. Now, facing her manufactured tears, her sudden vulnerability, he felt nothing. No pity, no anger, no residual affection. Just a profound weariness. Elara seemed to sense the shift in him, the impenetrable wall of indifference that had risen between them. A flicker of understanding, perhaps, or maybe just a desperate gamble, crossed her face. She sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Then, in a move that made Ethan's jaw drop, began to untie the apron she was wearing. Slowly, deliberately, Ethan recoiled, instinctively backing out the door, almost tripping over his own feet in his haste to escape the suffocating intimacy of the small apartment. Even in his hasty retreat, he inadvertently jostled her, sending her stumbling slightly. Even that clumsy movement didn't deter her. She clung to his sleeve, her grip surprisingly strong. Don't go. Please, don't go. I have no one else. Her voice was a desperate, panicked plea. I know you're angry, she wailed, her voice rising in pitch. Angry about what I said, angry about how I treated you, angry that I left you. Please, just give me another chance. Ethan finally understood. This was her tactic, a siege. She was going to wear him down, exhaust his resistance until he caved. She was betting on his past softness, his ingrained habit of always giving in, always apologizing, always prioritizing her feelings above his own. Because the old Ethan would have relented. The old Ethan would have been swayed by her tears, by her feigned vulnerability, by the sheer force of her persistence. But the old Ethan was gone, replaced by someone else, someone colder, sharper, more resolute. Without another word, Ethan simply turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the doorway, her hand still clutching his sleeve, tears streaming down her face. He spoke just once, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. If you want to stay, stay. Knock yourself out. Then, he was gone, leaving Elara alone in the small apartment, her cries echoing in the empty space. Even as he descended the stairs, he could still hear her voice, faint but persistent, calling after him from the window. I'll wait for you, Ethan. I'll wait forever. I'll be here when you come back. He kept walking, his pace unwavering, his expression unchanged, as if he hadn't heard a single word. He left the apartment building behind, Elara's desperate cries fading into the city's ambient noise. He drove straight to the mansion, his new home. His parents were overjoyed to see him. A lavish, impromptu welcome home dinner materialized as if by magic. His mother, beaming, had personally prepared a feast, a table laden with dishes, a tangible symbol of their long-awaited reunion. It was the first real family dinner he'd ever known. During the meal, he noticed Julian's eyes on him, a simmering resentment, a poisonous envy, lurking beneath the surface. Ethan understood. He'd usurped Julian's position, both in the company and in the family hierarchy. Resentment was inevitable. He didn't dwell on it. He focused on his parents, on the warmth of their welcome, on the unfamiliar, comforting feeling of belonging. After dinner, his mother led him to his new room, a vast, luxurious suite that felt both opulent and strangely impersonal. He settled in, the weight of the day finally catching up to him. He'd barely begun to process the whirlwind of changes, the seismic shift in his life. He'd expected a period of adjustment, a gradual acclimation to his new reality. Instead, the next day, Chairman Chow summoned him to his office, his expression grim, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. He laid a damning stack of documents on the mahogany desk, evidence of financial malfeasance, of systematic embezzlement, evidence that implicated Julian. It turned out, Julian, in a desperate, misguided attempt to cling to power and wealth, had begun subtly siphoning company assets, diverting funds, transferring resources. He'd panicked, fearing that Ethan's arrival meant the imminent loss of everything he'd come to consider his own. He hadn't realized that Chairman Chow, despite his disappointment in Julian's recent behavior, had still held a residual affection for his adopted son. This wasn't the first time Julian had been caught dipping his hand into the company coffers. Chairman Chow had warned him before, offered him a chance at redemption, a path back to integrity. Julian, blinded by greed and insecurity, had ignored the warning. The consequences were swift and decisive. Julian was stripped of his title, his privileges, and his freedom. He was taken into custody, facing serious charges, his future now measured in years, not promotions. His new office would be a small, windowless cell, his new colleagues less than desirable. His new task, endlessly operating a sewing machine, paying his debt to society, stitch by stitch. The following morning, the air outside Chow Corporation was thick with a strange, festive energy. A cacophony of voices, shouts, and cheers drifted up from the street below, reaching even the executive suites on the top floors. Peering out the window, Ethan saw a bizarre spectacle unfolding. The pavement below was carpeted with red roses, meticulously arranged in the shape of a giant heart. And standing in the center of this floral declaration, holding a microphone, was Elara. When she spotted Ethan at the window, her face lit up, a triumphant gleam in her eyes. She grabbed the microphone, her voice booming through the loudspeaker, amplified for the entire city block to hear. "Ethan," she declared, her voice echoing off the surrounding buildings. "I know I hurt you. I broke your heart. Before, you always walked 99 steps towards me. Now, it's my turn to walk 99 steps towards you." With a dramatic flourish, she produced a small velvet box from her purse. She opened it, revealing a gleaming men's ring. Holding it aloft towards Ethan's office window, she shouted, her voice ringing with theatrical emotion, "Ethan Chow, will you marry me?" Ethan sighed, a sound of weary resignation. He closed the window, shutting out the amplified spectacle, and buzzed HR. He'd intended to request that Elara be brought upstairs, back to her workstation. After all, Elara was a competent employee, undeniably capable in her own right. Personal drama aside, her skills were valuable to the company. Instead, HR delivered unexpected news. Elara had resigned. Apparently, Julian's downfall had triggered a cascade of office karma. The moment Julian was out of the picture, Elara's carefully constructed edifice of power and privilege crumbled. Employees, emboldened by Julian's removal, had finally unleashed their pent-up frustrations, their years of resentment towards Elara's entitled behavior. They'd recounted stories of Elara's self-proclaimed girlfriend status, her demands that colleagues cover her workload, her imperious treatment of subordinates, her expectation of constant, obsequious service. The floodgates had opened, revealing a torrent of grievances, a collective office catharsis. Elara, unaccustomed to facing anything but fawning admiration or fearful obedience, couldn't handle the sudden shift in office dynamics. The collective disapproval, the open hostility. She'd chosen to flee, to resign rather than face the consequences of her own actions. Ethan finally understood Elara's sudden reappearance at his apartment. After their breakup, she'd moved into Julian's penthouse, basking in the reflected glow of his false wealth and power. Julian's downfall had left her homeless, jobless, and utterly adrift. His small, rented apartment had been her last resort, a familiar port in a storm of her own making. In the end, it all circled back to the same core motivation. Elara's unwavering, almost pathological, pursuit of wealth and status, her unwavering belief in money as the ultimate measure of worth. Ethan laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. He finally understood the full, ridiculous irony of the situation. He stood up, deciding to confront the spectacle directly. As he emerged from the building, Elara's face illuminated with a radiant, almost blinding joy. "You came out!" she exclaimed, her voice ringing with triumph. She thrust the velvet box containing the ring towards him. "This is for you." I chose it especially. In front of the assembled crowd, the curious onlookers, the phone cameras, Ethan took the ring, examining it with a critical eye. Then, he calmly stated, his voice carrying clearly through the microphone, "This ring isn't my size, and it's a men's ring from Eternity brand, rather expensive." Actually, he paused, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I believe I've seen this exact ring before. On Julian. It's Julian's ring, isn't it?" Elara's face drained of color, her carefully constructed performance shattering into a million pieces. She stammered, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. No, it's not. I wanted to get you a ring." "Proposing with your ex-boyfriend's ring?" "Elara, it's not love you're after. It's money. It's power. It's status." But Elara wasn't ready to surrender. Her eyes, swimming with tears, pleaded with him, her voice trembling. "Look at all these people, Ethan. Everyone's watching. Can't you just say yes? Please? Just accept me?" Ethan scanned the crowd, the sea of faces, the raised phones, the expectant gazes. He understood her tactic. Public pressure. She was trying to force his hand, to manipulate him into a public acceptance, using the weight of social expectation as her weapon. Whether it was out of pity, out of embarrassment, or out of a desire to avoid a public scene, she was betting he'd cave. She'd miscalculated. The old Ethan might have hesitated, might have faltered, but the new Ethan was immune to her manipulations. His priorities had shifted. His focus was now laser-sharp, directed towards his career, his company, his own future. He wasn't that love-struck fool anymore. To prevent any further public spectacle, to definitively sever the last vestiges of their toxic entanglement, Ethan decided to pull back. The final curtain, to expose the raw, unvarnished truth. He spoke into the microphone, his voice resonating with cold, unwavering clarity. "When I was nobody, when I had nothing, you called me a pathetic loser, simpering simp. So, Elara, tell me what has changed now. Why this sudden affection? Is it the money? Is it the power? Is it the chow name? Because if it is, then you don't love me, Elara. You love the idea of me, the potential of me, the status I now represent. Take me out of the equation. Anyone standing here today, anyone with wealth, anyone with influence, that person, any person with those attributes, could be the object of your grand romantic gesture. Isn't that right? This isn't about love, Elara. It's about opportunism. In your carefully curated social circle, I just happen to be the wealthiest, most eligible option for now." Elara's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. She shook her head vehemently, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking with a desperate denial. But her protests were lost in the rising tide of murmurs from the crowd, the silent, collective judgment of the onlookers. No one was buying her act anymore. The charade was over. Finally, security intervened, gently but firmly escorting a sobbing, protesting Elara away from the scene. Her floral heart trampled underfoot, her public proposal dissolving into a pathetic, humiliating spectacle. For a long time afterwards, Ethan didn't see her, didn't hear from her. He almost began to believe he'd finally escaped her orbit. Then, one evening, at a Chow Corporation gala, a celebratory event marking a successful quarter, he saw her again. His own words, spoken in the heat of the moment, proved to be chillingly prophetic. Across the crowded ballroom, amidst the glittering chandeliers and the clinking champagne glasses, Elara was nestled comfortably in the arms of a balding, portly man with a prominent beer belly. He was old enough to be her father, and judging by the expensive suit, the Rolex watch, the air of casual affluence, undeniably wealthy. Seeing her, Ethan felt nothing. No anger, no resentment, no lingering pain. Just a faint sense of detached amusement, a quiet understanding of the predictable trajectory of her life. He raised his glass, a crystal flute filled with champagne, and mingled with his colleagues, the company's rising stars, the ambitious, talented individuals who were building Chow Corporation's future. He clinked glasses, exchanged toasts, celebrated their collective success. The past was just that, the past. Looking back, he realized how much time, how much energy he'd wasted chasing after someone who was never worth it, someone who saw him as nothing more than a means to an end. He'd been a fool, a simp, as Elara so cruelly labeled him. He'd squandered his youth, his potential, on a phantom, a mirage. But that was then. The past was gone, irretrievable. The future, however, stretched out before him, vast and promising. The years ahead were long, and the current was strong. He was finally free to chart his own course, to navigate the currents of his own life, unbound, unburdened, and finally, truly, his own man. The end.